I'm very nervous. So, my name is Dan Gilmore. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about world building with graphic design. Um, I am the graphic design lead at Atomhawk. Um, so, welcome to my presentation. For those of you that don't know much about Atomhawk, I just wanted to give a brief introduction to the team. So, Atomhawk is a full creative service agency for the games industry. We were founded in 2009, and I've been with the company for over 10 years. So both the company and myself have over a decade of experience working on some of the biggest IPs in the world of entertainment. And my current role is in graphic design, but I've formerly been responsible for animation and some UI design as well. Here is a little video of the work that we are doing. Talking to you about, let me get the lights back up there. First, I wanted to run through what graphic design means for us in a video games context. And then I'm going to show you some examples of games that I think do a really good job of world building with their graphic design. Then I'm going to show you some examples of stuff that Atomhawk is working on. And then we're going to round that off with some learnings from that. Some advice that I want you guys to take with you into your own work. So when I talk about graphic design in a video games context, there's basically 5 different categories that I think about. Those are logo design and marketing, UI design, icon design, player expression, and in-game assets. So let's just do a brief run through of what those are. So logo design and marketing, this is going to be one of the first times that people experience the visual style of your game. It has to be something that hooks people in, tells them a little bit about the game world that you're building. Without any other context. And it has to be something that can support a game through its entire life and support an IP into things like DLC and sequels. UI design is a key part of the graphic design experience when you're actually inside the game. It's often one of the first things you'll see in menus, and you're going to be interacting with it a lot. And it also forms a supporting structure for other graphic design content like icons and player expression. We've got icon design. So this is like very detailed communication specific graphic design, but it has to have the same flavor as the rest of your game. It must have like a high volume of assets that all need to feel consistent. And when rarity is involved, we're often designing like a system of progression throughout that set. Player expression is the name that we give to all of the stuff that you can use to customize your characters in game, or the stuff that represents you to other people in a multiplayer experience. So things like icons and nameplates and pieces of graphic design content like that. And then in-game assets would be things like the stuff that you would put into levels and see those kind of on the spaces that you're in and the objects in the world. And that's the key focus of this talk, but I think it's important to note that all of these types of graphic design do contribute to the world that you're building. When we think about the flow of art direction in a game, you have this sort of general art direction that is going to guide everything in the game. And then we often come in and give specific attention to creating a sort of graphic design specific art direction that informs all of these categories. And all of that contributes, along with everything else that's being developed for the game, to the world building of the game itself. And in-game assets is what I'm going to focus on most today. But yeah, all of these are important, and all of these are world building. So let's take a look at some industry examples that I think do a really good job of this. I'm going to be talking about these 3 games. So we've got Stray from Blue 12 Studios, Control from Remedy Entertainment, and Signalis from Rose Engine. And spoilers ahead, minor spoilers, if you haven't played any of these already. So Stray, I think, is a great example of a game that uses graphic design as a decorative and vibrant layer on top of their world. It also uses graphic design really well for inviting people to dig into the deep lore that's behind the game. So here's an example of that first point. You know, the environment is rich with graphic design, and it feels alive because of it. There's a lot of stuff in here that doesn't necessarily have full meaning behind it, like some of these signs, the way that they're written, they just look like signs, but they don't necessarily have any meaning behind them. But it gives you that sense that this is a world that is full of culture and history, and it feels like a world that's really lived in. There's a lot of layering done with you know, posters and things that have been plastered over with new content and new posters. Yeah, it really feels alive. And here's an example of wayfinding in the game. So this this icon, this thing here, is used to represent a group of characters in the game called the Outsiders. And part of the gameplay is trying to find that group, find out more about them. So this mural is used throughout the levels to help you find them. And then here's another example of that. And then when you actually get into some of the characters' apartments, you see that replicated like this example over here, which looks slightly different but is still connected. It's the same sign, and it actually adds more context because this text here is almost like a Rosetta Stone. Once you find out that the group is called the Outsiders, you can actually translate this and then use this knowledge to translate other things in the game. Which is sort of an extra layer that people that are really interested in lore can do. There's also one other example of this logo used in this space, and that is if you go and inspect this image up on the wall, you'll see it in the background of these characters. And at this point in the game, you haven't met all of these characters, so it's a really good way of establishing that connection, a connection that you'll experience later or read about in some of the diary entries that you see. In this way, graphic design is used as a thread that connects new areas together and new narrative elements, and it hints to and underpins some of the lore behind the narrative. The next example that I wanted to talk about is Control. There's a lot of great graphic design in here, but I want to focus on the logo that they use for their secret organization, the Federal Bureau of Control. And the reproducibility of graphic design that is leveraged for that. So we've got this logo, sorry, it's dark, over in the corner here, that you'll see repeated throughout the spaces in the levels. This is the logo of this shadow organization that's run out of the oldest house called the Federal Bureau of Control. And you can see that the logo is heavily inspired by things like the FBI's logo, the presidential seal. It draws on real world examples and your understanding of having seen these in previous contexts to kind of piggyback off that context and establish your understanding that this is an American governmental organization. It also follows the convention of having a motto down here. This translates into discovery, investigation, and empire. And again, once you know that, your kind of understanding of what this organization is trying to do is colored by that. And I think it's a really good way of tying into developing that organization. You'll also see in the logo this black pyramid up here. This is an image on mine. It's really dark. Can I just do that? And there we go. Yeah, so you'll see this black pyramid throughout the oldest house and also in some of the astral plane places that you visit. and it is represented in the logo. So this all kind of ties in there is a sort of understanding that the characters that developed this logo, the sort of people that developed for the FBC, have seen and experienced the same things that you are uncovering and experiencing as a player. And again, we'll see that repeated in posters that you find around the levels. So this one is sort of exploring diagrammatically what is going on in the astral plane, what is going on with that black pyramid, and then you'll see the logo repeated down here. The fact that they repeat the logo so many times throughout the game really kind of helps build the sense that this is a real functioning organization. And having it repeated here in some of the live action cutscenes where we see it as a patch on the shirt and in the background, again, apologies, that's not really showing up very well. Seeing it in live action and also seeing it in the game makes this great connection where it feels more real when you see it in the game because you've seen it in real life. The fact that graphic design is often a mass-produced thing creates this sense of realism and believability when you start to see it in all its different uses and in all its different contexts, especially when those contexts are ones that we understand from our everyday life. And then finally, I want to talk about Signalis. So Signalis is a game that uses a graphic design sensibility across their entire game aesthetic. It has graphic design elements that are used as key puzzle points, and those connect to the lore and reveal some of the deeper connections between the puzzles and the lore of the game. For those of you that might not have played this, the developers of Signalis describe it as a unique Eurasian Cold War retro-tech sci-fi take on cosmic horror. And if you have played the game, you'll know that that's an incredibly accurate and wonderful word salad of a sentence. The game is mostly played from this kind of top-down perspective that you'll see on the left-hand side here. And you see the characters as these small pixelated graphics. So when you discover these posters around the world that you can inspect sort of full screen, it gives you a lot more context about what those characters look like up close. And it gives you a little bit more context about some of the connections between like the organizations that created these, because these characters are kind of replicant cyborg type people. Each unit has its own branding as well, so you'll see that up here and here. And those brand logos are repeated throughout the levels as well. I think they even tie into some of the puzzles too. So having these posters for you to inspect is both a good way of kind of seeing the characters in a different light and also giving you context that's needed for some of the puzzles. Here's an example of a kind of first-person puzzle that you'll encounter. And these pieces of graphic design, sort of bordering on illustration as well, have deeper significance within the lore. Once you start to discover diary entries and other pieces of written content, this visual content ties in well with that. And then I talked about this kind of aesthetic, this graphic design aesthetic throughout the game. In the cutscenes, the action is often presented in these very stylized, almost poster-like visuals. Both of the founders of Rose Engine have backgrounds in graphic design and illustration. And I think it's a great way of kind of bringing that surreal quality that they set out to create into some of their cutscenes. The aesthetics of Signalis' experience draw heavily from graphic design principles across the whole game, and these are just some examples of that. So next I want to show some examples of things that we're working on at Atomhawk and how we use those principles. So the first IP I want to talk about is called Project Uprising. These are just working titles at the moment. These are IPs that are under development. And this is one where the graphic design component and the concept art component were really starting to explore this world at the same time. It's a good example of graphic design and concept art in collaboration with one another. So here is a piece of key art that was being developed by the concept art team. And it's designed to kind of show us this dystopian future that Uprising is based in. it's about a city that is flooded and divided, and there are different factions that are fighting for both the space and the remaining resources within that. And this is one of the factions. This is the police faction that you'll encounter. So we did a lot of exploration around the graphic design for these factions. Here's one of the sheets of pieces that we were developing for the police faction. We like to design like a kit of parts that we can use across all of the different concepts. And it's a good way of kind of bringing some consistency to the concept art, that the various vehicles and characters and spaces have the same treatment on them. We also look at fleshing out the world, the infrastructure. This is a future space, so what are some of the kind of corporations that might be building this stuff? What are some of the warning signs? How are they different from current day warning signs, but still cue you into that context? And then here is an example of the concept art with that pass, that graphic design pass added. And you can see that it really just enhances and lifts the concept art that little bit more, makes it feel a little bit more lived in and realistic. Graphic design is used to enhance the concepts and create that consistency across units, spaces, and things like that. The second IP that I want to talk to you about is, again, codenamed Myths and Monsters. So in this, we want to show kind of current day or near current day spaces. And so we use graphic design as a way to ground those in reality. We also explored how we could use graphic design to kind of enhance the storytelling that we're doing with our character design. So here's a piece of key art that's being developed for this. Myths and Monsters is a world where magic and myth are real, and we have a sort of task force of heroes that respond to these supernatural occurrences and events around the world. And here's one of the spaces that we're designing, and you can see kind of in the background of this space, but I think it's still important, these banners that we've been adding to the space. So when we set out to do this, we were looking at a lot of the concept art that was being produced, the same reference as the concept artists. But then we've also looked at how real museums would brand their exhibits. We were fortunate enough to have a good relationship with the Great North Museum in the Northeast, and we're able to kind of visit that space and see what they're doing with their kind of exhibition branding, and that informs our design. So here are some of the options that we presented to the art director for this. We're doing different designs for kind of the banner, the logo that the sort of exhibit will have, and then a logo for the museum itself. And you can see how these different concepts change the feeling of that space, with their use of color and topography. Here's a couple more. So we feel that graphic design can help fill out the world in a believable way and kind of ground it to things that you would see in the modern day. Here's one of our character designs that's being worked on by the concept team. And they asked us for some support from the graphic design team to help with this character and his tattoo design. So when we started looking into this, we were thinking about, the character and how he fits with that culture. He is on the task force, so he knows that myth and magic are real. And so we felt that his tattoo choice needed to be something that was a little bit more than just skin deep. It has some meaning behind it. So we looked at sort of Norse mythology to inspire the design. Here's one of the sketches that we started with. And you can see that we're really thinking about, embedding things in it that would signal that it is of Norse origin and that he has an understanding of what it is that he's chosen. This is telling the story of Thor's fishing trip, where he battles the Midgard serpent and almost causes the end of the world. So there's symbolism and there's story behind what we're designing here. And here's some of the development of that. As we work this up, legibility is a concern. We want to make sure that this is going to be seen at quite small scale, so we want certain elements to be very readable, but we know that this is something that players will be able to inspect up close in certain situations, so we need it to be fully realized as well, and we've gone and created this so that it looks like a real tattoo. And then here is the development of that. So this was a 3D model that was developed by the 3D team based on the concept art. And you can see the tattoo used here. Just behold the beauty of this arm. I'll even put the lights down for this one because I think, ooh, wow. I wish I was that buff. So yeah, graphic design is a layer that helps to add depth to our character design and link back to the lore that we're developing. So some of the takeaways for this, this is basically advice that I give to members of our team, and it's advice that I think is relevant for everybody. And that is that we want you to start early. So a lot of the time we're called into projects when there's been a lot of development already, and it's more difficult for us to hook our work into the lore because it's already been developed. We want to be able to kind of have an impact that hooks into as many things as possible. So we really want to be at that foundational level if possible. We feel it's less effective when it's done as a pass near the end, just sort of kind of being called in to kind of beautify things that are already close to completion. And it's really important that we establish that kind of graphic design art direction and how that differs from the art direction for some of the other parts of the game. When you're researching, I think it's really important not just to research visually, but also to research with a bit more intent to understand things like the history and the culture of where your references come from. This is especially important if you're designing for stuff that's based in the past, to understand what it was that was going on at the time that informed those design choices. And it's incredibly important for things that are set in the future as well, because the now is the past of the future. And our current past still exists in the future, and it's something that designers in the future will be looking back to as well. There are plenty of games recently that have come out that are ostensibly set in the future, that have an aesthetic that is derived, very much from our past. We want to build up a library of assets that we can use across the game. Consistency is something that's really important. So we often try to design a suite of repeatable elements that can be used on characters, vehicles, level designs, and really bring those concepts to life, but also bring them all together as well. And it's important to have lots of different versions of the same design if it's repeated. That can straddle the need for variety and consistency. And when we see in the example of the FBC logo from Control, there's like 15 different versions of the logo. There's the rendered metal one, there's the patch one, there's the poster one. Thinking about how that logo would really be used as a sort of brand tool in your fictional universe is important. I like to tell my team members to design like they're there. It's important that you kind of immerse yourself in the IP that you're creating, in the world that you're building. So I like to think about the culture and the values of that world and try to keep those in mind as you're designing. Often I'll listen to music that is related to the IP that we're designing for. Reading books that were written at the same time if you're setting something in a historical setting. Is a really good way of understanding what's going on. You can think about it as role-playing a designer from that world, and that can help with making choices that feel authentic. It's incredibly important that we establish a rule set that informs the design work that we do. There's value beyond just the sort of graphic design content that we produce in creating a rule set that informs consistency, especially when it's something that's going to have DLC content or sequel content to sort of document what it is that makes your graphic design style for that game. And we also need to identify opportunities when we can flex or break those rules for specific use cases. So we might have examples in a game where you've got a faction, but one character needs to feel extra special, and so it doesn't follow those rules. And that's a great way of kind of helping to create something that stands out and is still tied to everything else. And as boring as it sounds, and my team hate me for repeating this, please document everything you're doing and make sure that those rules as they're being established are being written down. It's important to be able to articulate those to the rest of your team and to the rest of the team that are building this with you, It's even important to be able to share this outside of the graphic design team, with everybody else that's working on this. So that is basically the end of the talk. If you wanted to take a picture of this, all the fonts are broken. So thank you. Does anybody have?
Has anyone got any questions?
Thank you very much. Please, someone have at least one question. Oh yeah, this gentleman over here.
Is that okay?
That guy.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if there are any like bad examples of games not following these rules and this kind of like
Ooh.
yeah, like changes the perception of the game or something like that.
I don't want to name names. No. Maybe we can have a chat afterwards. I have strong opinions, but maybe too strong for an open session. But good question.
Back down. So with the graphic design, it's informed by the narrative. Have you ever had cases where the narrative ends up being informed by graphic design choices?
I won't say definitively, but I think that when we're involved in IP at the beginning, when we're working on it with everyone else, we're able to kind of inform choices a bit more. Yeah, I think that it's definitely more of a collaboration when other stuff is still undecided. And I would love to be able to claim like, yes, I know this exact part that we've informed, but when it is a collaboration, when everybody's working on building it, it just feels very, very natural, and suggestions that the graphic design team make can be taken on by concept or by 3D. Yeah, if that's a good enough answer, I'll leave it there.
Hey,
Hi.
do you have a sort of feeling of sadness when, say, the game design decides not to use an asset, or that it is the case that the asset is supposed to be hidden, and do you think that like players should be able to see it, but they won't?
Yeah, I mean, this goes to sort of wider advice, but it's very important to be able to separate yourself from the work and know that you did a good job even if the work isn't used. We recently had a project where we designed hundreds and hundreds of icons, and then that project ended up not being shipped. That feature was cut. So all of the work that we've done, whilst I'm very proud of it, I don't think it will ever see the public light of day. And as gutting as that is, it's still important to tell the team that they learned a lot doing it and that we take those skills on to the next job. So yeah, I'm sad that the work's gone, but the skills aren't gone and the learnings from them aren't.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was really good. I'm just thinking, so you gave a lot of examples of different worlds, shall we say, mythical worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find there's a challenge when a project comes along that's closer to a real world example, not something that's mystical or sci-fi? What are the challenges around that?
Yeah, so simplicity is something that I think is very difficult to capture at times. When we're trying to make something look like it could exist in the real world, there's such a desire within my team to kind of show the full force of their skills and make something that's amazing and never been seen before. But sometimes that's not the ask. Sometimes you just need to design a logo for a cafe that sits in the background of a game, and that's really important work to be able to do as well. I think that I try very much to focus on what are the skills that we're developing, and so when you're developing something that needs to look real, and maybe even mundane, how do you how do you approach the research for that? Like, you can become very good at critically and analyzing your reference and saying, okay, these are the things that make something feel mundane, or these are some of the things that make something feel business-like, or we've even had opportunities to design things that are supposed to be intentionally bad, like that beautiful slide at the beginning of my presentation. So yeah, that's really fun to be able to kind of use those analytical skills in your design.
Lovely, thank you.
Are we doing on time? We're good? Oh, great.
When you talked about Signalis, you
Yes.
mentioned that something almost strayed into illustration. I was wondering how you would define that line and maybe what different roles they would serve.
Sure, yeah, no, that's fair. I think that we have a lot of different skills on the team. Some of us have more illustrative backgrounds than others. And so when I'm assigning that kind of work out to people in the team, knowing people's strengths and weaknesses is a really important part of that. And then within Atomhawk specifically, we also have a concept art team that would be able to do a lot of crossover with us, really. Like, there's a sort of, I think illustration sits in a position where it's somewhere between like graphic design and concept art, and so that's why I made that comment. But I'm really keen that people on the graphic design team, people on the concept art team, and all the other teams that we have feel like they're all just working on the same thing, and we're all just creatives in it together. So yeah, just to highlight that we have different strengths and weaknesses within the team.
Fair enough, thank you.
No worries. Oh, we have another. Oh, yeah, sorry. Down here too.
Thank you
Hi.
for the talk. Yeah,
Thank you.
hi. So how does graphic design team contributes to like games that set in a world before the printing press was invented, like fantasy game or
Yeah,
like,
so there's this kind of interesting space where we have to design graphics because we're designing for a game that exists now, but we want to take the aesthetic of artwork that was done before the printing press. There's some fantastic examples of that out at the moment. I think I'm going to butcher the name and maybe get it wrong. Is it Incluminati? There's like a game out at the moment that's kind of inspired by illuminated manuscripts and the style of those illustrations. And it uses it as the gameplay and extensively and sort of menus and things like that. Yeah, I think that you're being informed by art and then translating that into modern day graphics. Yeah, that's the best answer I can give.
Thank you.
No worries.
So I'm not a graphic designer, but I do understand that there are a lot of iterative processes with like character design, different types of, this car has to look this way, this, all kinds of stuff. My question, and I don't want to set anyone off here, how do you feel about the current state of AI graphics design, and do you envision a future where there may be a possibility of feeding your concepts into like an iterative design for different styles?
I think that we are very aware of the development that generative AI is, the path that it's on. Right now, I've done some personal tests with it, and I'm not, I don't see anything that I want to use in my workflow. I don't think it really adds anything. Graphic design, I think, is very challenging for AI right now. If in what I have seen, because it leans so much on like communication, graphic communication, you can create stuff that looks like graphic design, but it doesn't have the meaning that a real person would be able to put into that. So unless I see some sort of big developments in that, I don't think it will be a tool that we can use. And I personally feel that the fact that the work that we do has been designed by people and has been carefully considered is what our clients are interested in, and they don't just want stuff that looks like a graphic. Like, they need it to have symbology and meaning behind it, and I don't think you can tie stuff into IP and to lore and to character development if you're just generating it.
So thank you.
No worries.
Hello. So you see a lot of games out there, right? Like with simple UI and stuff, graphic designs.
Yeah.
And as soon as the game get like noticed by like a lot of people and stuff, and it end up as like a big IP or something. And as soon as it goes into like a part 2 or something, you get a graphic designer which is like a bit bold, and it looks a bit out of place in some of the games. How do you think people can approach it and like make it a bit more soothing to the eyes?
Let me just check that I understand your question. So you're saying that if a game has been designed and maybe hasn't had a full kind of graphic design treatment on it, but now it is deserving of one.
Like if you see Doom 2016, right? It have a certain UI and stuff and elements to it.
Yeah.
And if you see Eternal, it's a bit more like a bold decision towards it.
Yeah.
And it's like more demonic and things. That looks good on the eyes, and people really liked it. And as you see Spider-Man 1, right? It's like very much simple and clean. And the second one is a bit more, I noticed, and there are like Miles powers and stuff, which like a bit more edgy on the eyes, I say, like color-wise and stuff. Do you think that's an issue, or like, I know that when the game comes out, like people might like it and end up playing it and get used to it. But I felt like it's a bit more edgy on the eyes, and there are some games which used to do better than that. What do you think it's the best approach to do it?
I think that I have very much enjoyed games and the gameplay of games that I thought had bad graphic design and bad UI design at times. I don't think that those should be barriers to people's enjoyment, but I love the idea that a game gets recognized for its good qualities, and then the areas that aren't so good get that extra love and attention. I think it's a unique thing to be able to come into an IP that is already established and be able to kind of bring your own vision to that and help set a new direction for it. I think that's a very exciting opportunity, but it needs careful attention to understand what's good about the original and what you're not changing, and where you can add value.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's pretty much.
Hi there.
Hello.
So obviously there's a lot of time and effort that goes into all of the research that you're doing sort of on those tattoos or other elements. In an ideal world, every game would have the budget for us to do that on every element that we could. But the reality is very rarely that we can do that. So in a world where there was only like one aspect that we could afford to go to that depth of sort of research detail and so forth on the graphic design, what area would it be?
That's so dependent on what the kind of game that you're creating is. I think if it is something that is going to be played with a lot of menu interaction, I would say UI design is something that, because it is both functional and has the potential to look really nice and feel really nice to interact with, would be an important one to do. But if it is a world that needs to feel like it is full and rich, like those examples of Stray, then putting it into stuff that you can repeat over and over again and have a kind of big impact on the world, the way that the world looks, could be the direction to go. If you have a specific example and you want to chat afterwards, I'd love to talk to you about it.
All right, thanks very much.
No worries.
Hello.
Hello.
So I think something that I just want to clarify with yourself is how important do you think it is to have a wide breadth of knowledge and information around various different industries and thematics when it comes to graphic design? So, for example, one thing that I think personally would be quite important, especially because considering you spoke about UI design, is UX design. So, like how the actual player is experiencing it. And I wonder as well,
within your profession, do you look into all sorts of different things from like architecture, fashion, advertising, things like that?
Yeah, so it's really important to be able to draw from a wide range of things. You know, fashion design can inspire graphic design, architecture can inspire concept art. There's so much crossover, but you can't be an expert on everything. So that's why the research phase is so important. You know, when you understand what it is, what the IP is that you're working with, you kind of have to try and become an immediate expert or become an expert in that as quickly as you can. So, you know, I've worked on sci-fi things where I've studied a lot of NASA like technology and their brand guidelines and all of that kind of stuff to kind of immerse myself in that universe and be able to design for it more effectively. Yeah, so I've lost. Is that good? I've lost the. Okay, cool. Thank you. One more.
What's your advice in terms of coming up with, say, brand names or logos or slogans? Just actually, what's the thing going to be called, and where the kind of responsibility for naming things comes
Yeah,
from?
naming. I love doing it. And a lot of the stuff that we work on, it has to get checked from a legal perspective, just to make sure that it's not going to interfere with a real world brand or a real world slogan. And we've had sort of, you know, things where I was really attached to a name and then it comes back that we can't use it and we have to come up with something else. In terms of my advice for kind of naming stuff, I think go with, don't be tempted to go with something that looks good in that specific instance, right? Like I've designed logos for personal projects and stuff where I pick the name because the M and the W look really cool at one end and the other. And if you had to change, if that was a real project and you had to change it because you couldn't use that word, then because the graphic design hinges on you using like specific letter forms or specific arrangements of words, that you're a bit screwed. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.